So Greater Manchester has always seen the long-term strategic importance of China. As you may be aware, there are already very strong, long-established civic links. So the relationship has always been a long-standing one. But I think also you can look to Greater Manchester in terms of its approach more broadly. It has always been a city region that has operated with a long-term mindset and vision, and that has meant that we've maintained a very sort of consistent approach in the way that we've worked with our partners in China, something that I think very much resonates in China in terms of approach.
Now, let me bring you back to 2015, and Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Manchester back then, and you played a significant role in facilitating and preparing for the visit. So can you share with us some of the behind-the-scenes efforts?
Yes, of course. Well, as it won't surprise you to hear, that visit was quite some time in the planning. And of course, there were efforts across the UK and China bilaterally to really ensure that visit was as impactful as possible. So there was a lot of toing and froing with partners in the embassy, but also politically at very senior levels, both on the UK and Chinese side, to ensure that we were able to ensure that Manchester was a part of that programme. And you may also have seen that programme went on to include footballing components, which again, I think in Manchester's context were very important elements, perhaps in swaying that visit and ensuring that Manchester was an important part of the state visit programme.
Yeah, I could imagine there must be a lot of back and forth, and that probably we should bring him here or there. And then how does Manchester's unique sectors such as manufacturing and its culture play into this visit?
Greater Manchester is the fastest growing city region in the UK. You've seen growth across a diverse range of sectors from tech. Greater Manchester has been voted the fastest growing European tech city, through to areas such as advanced manufacturing, materials, of course 2D materials and graphene being a really important element of that. So the progress that has been made in those areas through to life sciences and health. And I think probably the last element of that, and probably the most important, is the road to net zero. So our collective ambitions to tackle the climate change emergency. And of course, Greater Manchester set out a 2038 ambition to hit net zero. That is an incredibly aggressive target. It's 12 years ahead of the national target, but an area that again will present very significant opportunities for the UK and China to work together in addressing those challenges, but also in leveraging the technological advancements that we've seen being made in China.
So you have touched upon a wide range of collaboration between Greater Manchester and China, and we're going to go back to some of the topics that you mentioned. And the visit also helped secure the direct flights between Manchester and Beijing, and it started in 2016. So over the past decade, how do you see these flights contribute to the expansion of business and trade of Greater Manchester?
What we've seen since the establishment of those direct routes into Manchester and Beijing, but more recently the launch of the Shanghai route last year between Manchester and Shanghai, is that those routes have played a critical role in accelerating engagement across trade and investment. We saw rapid growth and expansion in exports. I think it was just shy of 50% growth in just a 2-year period post the launch of the Manchester-Beijing route. We saw rapid growth in number of tourists coming into the region. And of course, you look at areas such as education.
So connectivity plays a key role in bilateral ties, and Airport City Manchester is a prominent joint project or venture between China and Manchester and the UK. So aligning with Greater Manchester's ambition, shall I call it ambition, of becoming the Heathrow of the North. The project is not completed yet. So how do you see this collaboration impacting Greater Manchester's role as a trade in the foreseeable future?
I'm sure you will have heard of various sort of iterations of whether it's the Northern Powerhouse or the levelling up agenda from previous governments. But fundamentally, at the heart of that is recognising the huge untapped potential for economic growth that we see in the northern cities of the United Kingdom. And of course, given the tremendous progress being made in China in innovation terms, it's critically important that we're able to do that for northern regions. And so the progress that we've been made with Beijing and Shanghai has been critical in driving that forward.
So in a bigger context, China-UK relations have experienced some ups and downs, we have seen. But starting this year, we have witnessed more high-level exchanges between the two countries. How do you see the reassessment of bilateral ties benefiting Greater Manchester's economy?
So from a Greater Manchester perspective, of course, to see the improvements in the bilateral relationship, I think is going to be very beneficial in terms of our continued focus and engagement. But I would go back to the areas that I've outlined in terms of opportunities for deeper cooperation exchange. We've spoken about the climate change emergency and the opportunities that presents for innovators in and around the net zero agenda. So how do we bring innovative technologies from both sides together to address some of those challenges?
And you mentioned green transition. Both the UK and China are committed to net zero. How do you think these two countries, or specifically Greater Manchester and some of the Chinese cities, can work together in that field?
Yeah, so there's a broad range of projects, Net Zero Northwest and HyNet, projects across areas from hydrogen, carbon capture, through to leveraging battery technologies. You will have seen that the government has set out some really ambitious targets around house building, and we want to make sure that our commitments in that space are also consistent within the context of those net zero targets. So huge number of opportunities across the board to collaborate in that space.
But we know that some of the Chinese investments were removed from the critical infrastructure in the UK. So how do you persuade the Chinese investors to come over to Greater Manchester based on its past experience?
So as I said earlier, Greater Manchester has always been a very open, very welcoming city region to international investment. I think the key, and this applies to China as well as any other major international player that is looking at coming and investing in the area, ultimately it's about coming and seeing it firsthand. But, as I say, we're a very welcoming, we're a very open city region, and that isn't going to change anytime soon.